Hello, Spookies, and welcome to the Rick or Treat Horrorcast, hosted by yours, ghoulie, Ricky J. Duarte. My guest today is an actor, an entertainer, a comedian, and an all-around brilliant artist. He's a Chortle Student Comedian of the Year 2019 runner-up, a Leicester Square New Comedian of the Year finalist, a recipient of the Mike Craig Comedy Industry Excellence Award. His new cabaret comedy show, The Stand-Up Horror Show, has won the Liam Byrne Award and was selected by Creepy Tourists for their alternative guide to the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. Welcome to the Horrorcast, Tom Short.
Hello, thank you for having me. I'm very excited to do it.
I'm thrilled to have you. I'm so excited to talk about the movie we're talking about today. We're talking one of, if not the best horror comedies of all time. And you're the perfect guest for this. We're talking Shaun of the Dead.
Yes, it came up because we were chatting about it, and you asked me about like what I thought was the best horror comedy film, and I genuinely think it's so good. It's almost like a crystallized form of the perfect blend of horror and comedy. It's I'd be surprised if it ever gets beaten. And we're nearly 20 years, if not more than 20 years, since it came out now.
It's been 19 years since this movie came out, which makes me feel really old.
The same. You know what? Whenever someone says that kind of thing to me, I always feel like, the end of Temple of Doom when he's like, don't look," and he like melts. It's like Shaun of the Dead came out 19 years ago, nearly 20 years ago, and then me and you will just like slowly melt.
Well, listeners, you can't see it, but that's actually what's happening to our faces right now. So
by the end of this podcast, it will just be two pools of fleshy globs. It's going, yeah, it was very good, wasn't it?
that's typically what I look like when I wake up in the morning anyway. So
Oh, very much snap.
well, all right, Tom, I am thrilled to have you. Tom and I met recently. I was afforded the wonderful opportunity to interview Tom about your upcoming comedy show, The Stand-Up Horror Show. Why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about that?
So the stand-up horror show, it is my attempt to mash up horror and comedy in a live setting. So what happened was I went to a art exhibition in London called the Horror Show, and it was all about how artists had used horror as a way of shining a light or providing a mirror for the horrors in the real world. Because I think that the most effective horrors are the ones that you like watch and you go, my God, that could like happen. That could happen in real life right now. When we wouldn't even know it. And I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Then I was like, I wonder if you could do that in a live comedy sense. And I was already like creating live comedy work, and I'm really interested in where the boundaries of comedy are. So I thought, oh, let's do that. And I started to go, okay, so where's the crossovers? Okay, so let's do horror, let's do funny horror stories. Let's do mind reading as part of the audience interactions, and slowly it became this one man occult horror cabaret night. And a lot of people seem to be really interested in the concept, and I think it really seems to be catching fire. And we're just at the point, I think, just before hopefully whatever happens with the show happens. So it's like it's very exciting currently, because it's like almost endless possibilities right now.
It is I mean, so I was able to see it in an early form and, a video of it, and it's fucking funny. You have a really great concept going, and you have a great delivery. And I mean, I wish to God I could, you know, hop across the pond and visit the UK and come see this production because it's genuinely funny and it's very well thought out. And from what you have told me about the way that the show has evolved since that video was taken, it's very exciting. It sounds like an absolute blast. What can you tell us about the way that the show has grown and how it got to the point that it is now?
So the way that this show grew, and I come at this from a improviser's standpoint. I think a lot of stand-ups, like traditional stand-ups, go down this like mindset of it. You know, it's one man show and a one man like a one horse, one cart, and like everything's self-contained. Whereas I think the thing that makes improvisers like so interesting as performers is we're very open to collaboration. So I've been, you know, very open to taking this to the people who I work with and saying, okay, how do we design this show? How do we develop this show? And um, I work with a guy called Ian Wilkie, absolute genius he is. And he said to me, I think that this is really working on a comedic level, but I think the people who come at it from a horror level um, need to have something really exciting to come away with. So after we had developed the comedy side of it, I then I went back and I looked at how do we make it more tense, more dramatic. Um, so what we've done now is that the show isn't my show anymore. It's the this magician that's coming out of retirement who had like all these death-defying tricks, and the tricks include him getting shot at by a nail gun, and he dies just before the show starts from this nail gun. So then it falls on me as the understudy to actually do the rest of the show, and it's just opened up so many possibilities in terms of me being able to explore this show and make mistakes, and theatrical mistakes. Like it doesn't matter so much if it's not my show that things are going wrong. But it also means that when we come to the horror elements, it means that I in the show are not as kind of au fait with like this nail gun as the original magician would be. So I think it's got like a real kind of like Saw element to it now, of someone who's having to do these elements of horror against their will, and I think that really raises the stakes, but it also I think allows the audience to go on that journey with me, like both comedically and from a horror standpoint. And I don't know, for me, it's always been like a mashup of like a live horror and a live comedy show, but now it feels like you're watching like a live horror comedy, and with all the laughs, but also the kind of tense and the scares that you would kind of expect in the cinema, but live.
It's incredible hearing the process of how something like this comes together, and you have incorporated a little bit of like kind of nods to some classic horror. What are some of the horror films that inspired you and kind of snuck their way into the production?
So it was initially inspired by in terms of the aesthetics, the Phantom of the Opera. And so in it, I wear a half mask that the Phantom wears. But that the more that I looked into the research and development of the show, and I started to look at the actual horror elements of the Phantom of the Opera and the more serious tone. So, like a little fact for you. So, do you know the first Pokemon film, Mewtwo Strikes Back?
Okay.
The characterization of Mewtwo was based on the Phantom of the Opera, and the moment I kind of found out how versatile that character was, I was then able to go, okay, so again, we can look at how do we take this character that's a little bit shunned and a little bit out of their depth and put them in this comedy field. So that was like a really big influence. I've already mentioned Saw, this kind of element of um, not being able to completely control what's going on and being forced to kind of interact with these horror elements against my will. And we've got like bits of voiceover now. So we got like bits of voiceover with the original magician kind of telling me like little bits for the show as he's like slowly dying off stage. Uh, and yeah, and like every time that we go like check up on him, like the theatre hand will come back just like covered in more blood and telling me that he's really not able to do the next trick. Um, another another horror film that really inspired it is it's going to sound ridiculous, but Hocus Pocus.
Okay, go on.
So as I kind of started to develop the show, and I was like, okay, so what other elements of horror can I start to pull from in the real world? I then went, okay, so how about if we take elements of witchcraft and the occult and start to put those into the show? Because I think that there is a certain amount of us that want to kind of believe in magic, and I think that there's a magic to theatricality, and I was like, okay, so Hocus Pocus has got those darker elements, but also it's able to undercut them with comedy, in the way that the witches interact. And I've always viewed my shows as almost like a dialogue between me and the audience. So I'll often have like interactive elements. So I almost view me and the audience as like I'm is it Glenn Close, the main witch?
Bette Midler.
Sorry, Bette Midler.
As a homosexual, I'll forgive you this one time.
Oh well, yeah, I'll hand my Abro card in.
Yeah.
At the end of it, but yeah, Bette Midler, like the audience is almost like Bette Midler, and I'm like Sarah Jessica Parker, this kind of like unknowing witch, because I feel like a lot of the people who come to this show will know more about the occult than I will. So for them to be able to kind of guide me through some of these elements of the occult, I think is just, like I said, I want it to be an experience that people haven't come across before, and to put the audience in a position of power, I think is actually really I'd say it's quite rare as far as like live shows.
Yeah.
But yeah, that definitely influenced my kind of thought process once I had added the occult in, of being like, okay, so what if I'm this like person who's interested in the occult, knows a little bit about the occult, but is ultimately less knowledgeable than everyone around them, and it's like, who else is around me? The audience.
That's brilliant. I really do think that this is an incredible concept, and you're such a talented performer and a very funny person. I love that you mentioned that many of us really kind of wish that magic existed, or hoped that, that it does. I recently listened to an interview with, one of the masters of horror, film director Mick Garris, on my buddy Kevin Lane's podcast. Shout out to Spill Your Guts with Kevin Lane. And Mick was talking about how lucky we are as horror fans, because we never really let go of that kind of piece of our imagination. We keep playing with toys, we keep collecting comic books, we maintain this childlike. I think there's a difference between being childish and being childlike, and I think that for a horror fan, we get to keep being childlike in many ways.
Yeah, it's I think that there is a certain imaginative quality that if you want to be into horror films, and by that I don't know about you, but I feel like this will be my next controversial thing I say on your podcast.
Uh-oh.
But like for me, I view horror as like an umbrella, and I also include like science fiction in there as well. Yeah, and I think like I come across people who are like, no, I hate science fiction, I hate horror, I only like things that are like kitchen sink drama, and I just think, like, I don't feel sorry for them, but it's like it's like your life must be like a little bit less colorful than mine
Yeah.
if you're not able to enjoy these like concepts that are just really fun to kind of dip into and then go, oh, okay, everything's okay because I'm able to switch that off and I've come back into the real world again.
Yeah, I think the umbrella term that people are starting to use now is genre, right? A genre
Mm,
film, a genre, which at times kind of irks me because I feel like it's erasure of horror as what it is, but it is also completely inclusive of sci-fi. There are so many crossovers. You know, there's a marriage between horror and sci-fi. And frankly, and I talk about this a lot, horror is not confined to, you know, the Michael Myers and the Jason
mm,
Voorheeses and the Norman Bateses of the world. I mean, my taste for horror was acquired from Disney movies when I was a kid. The end of Fantasia, when Chernabog, the demon on the mountain, you know, kind of
mm,
comes to life, or when Maleficent has Sleeping Beauty hypnotized and kind of luring her to the spindle. This is horror. The headless
mm.
horseman, right?
Yeah.
In the legends in the Disney's animated Sleepy Hollow. These are really horror sequence. Hello, the Haunted Mansion ride is my obsession. So horror pops up where, you know, in places that people don't even necessarily think about. So when people say I can't stand horror, I hate horror, you know, maybe not all of it. There's certainly something that you've found that you've enjoyed through the years.
Oh yeah, totally. Like I think that again, that's the beauty uh of horror, and I think and comedy also falls under the same umbrella that it can exist as like a subgenre in so many other pretty much any genre that you put it in. And I mean, I mentioned sci-fi before, but like a lot of people consider the very first sci-fi Mary Shelley's Frankenstein
Mm-hmm.
like that started off as a horror. So like they are very closely linked, and like a whole load of sci-fi that I've watched, I've been like, wow, this is like, even though this is not labeled as horror, this is like incredibly scary to kind of like consider as a concept.
Yeah,
Um,
the first Alien film is a sci-fi movie that's shot as a horror film, right? It's a
mm,
sci-fi script that is a horror movie. It's the perfect blend. It's the perfect blend.
mm. Yeah, but I mean, I love horror films, so I was like proper buzzing when you asked me to do this podcast.
Good. I'm so glad. Well, all right, let's why don't you tell listeners where and when they, and we will remind everyone at the end, but when is the stand-up horror show happening?
So the main block that we're doing at the moment is the Edinburgh Fringe run, which is on at 3:40 every day at a place called the Caves, just upstairs at the Caves, and it's quite a prestigious venue. It's very kind of gothic, which is one of the reasons why I decided to choose it because I thought it would suit the aesthetic. It won. I only know this because I was googling it the other day. It won like best venue at the Edinburgh Fringe 2009. So it's like got like a fair amount of prestige to it, and part of that is because of its kind of setting. Um, and that's from the 3rd to the 27th of August at 3:40 for 1 hour. So it's hopefully something that you can kind of check out like earlier on in the day and then kind of cater the rest of your evening around, you know, whatever it is you want to do that evening.
Do you hear that, UK listeners? Look into this, check it out. I miss New York City used to have a fringe festival and it has gone away for many, many years. I'm surprised no one's kind of bought it up and restarted it, but I love the idea of a fringe festival and bringing artists, you know, giving them a platform, giving them a stage, and letting them present their own work, I think is
Mm.
a brilliant, wonderful, and important concept. So I'm really excited for you, and I'm happy that you get this wonderful chance to bring the show to audiences and showcase your love of both comedy and horror.
Thank you. Yes. This here feels like this has got the potential to be like my biggest and best ever show. So, like, you know, come along because it's like, I, you know, I want you to be along on this journey, whatever it is.
That's excellent. Oh, I'm so happy for you. I really, really wish I
Mm.
could make it. But when it's a smash success, you can bring it over to New York and then I'll get to see it.
Yeah, that is very much the plan.
Good. Excellent. Hey, at a point in my show, I love to make some recommendations for horror that me and my guests have recently consumed. Have you seen anything recently that you recommend?
What have I seen recently? I watched Tetsuo the Iron Man.
Oh, that's trippy.
Oh yeah. It pops in my head because I was talking about like sci-fi, so I was like, but yeah, that's about this guy who's kind of slowly being consumed by by like all these like electrical equipment. Um, it's got a very kind of Akira vibe to it.
Okay.
But yeah, that's I'd say that was on my list. And the reason why I ended up watching that was because I bought a book called 1001 Movies to Watch Before You Die,
Okay.
um, as like an attempt to kind of get out of just watching the same films like on repeat. So I checked that out, and it's got some real cool kind of like body horror in there as this guy slowly starts turning into this. He doesn't become like mechanical, but he just kind of slowly starts absorbing all this iron and like wires, and he like slowly becomes like more and more. What's the word? I was going to say comatose, like more and more unable to do anything.
It's a bizarre film. It's beyond that, it's a bizarre experience. Like you experienced that movie, you know?
Oh yeah, yeah. It was. I was. It was one of those films where I think about three quarters of the way in, no, about a quarter of the way in, you go. Oh, this is. I don't know how long is this on for. This already feels hard to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. And you kind of want to see how much longer do I have to go
Yeah,
before I get through this.
yeah. I tell you one other film that I've watched recently, but it wasn't a new watch. Right, it's one of my favorite films. It's called Zombie Flesh Eaters or Zombie Two.
Oh,
Uh,
sure.
Lucio Fulci. Do you know what? Right, it's one of the few films that whenever I watch it, at the end of the film, depending on what time it is, I'll often rewatch it from the beginning. And the reason why is because the end scene of the film is, in my opinion, perfect. It's like I can't think of a better scene in a horror film. I'm assuming you've seen it as
Yeah.
a yeah. So for anyone who's not seen it, it's in Italy. They had this. They have like a different thing around like movie laws and like copyright laws, and it's officially and unofficially connected to the George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. It like exists within that world, and this boat turns up. It's got a zombie on it. They then go to like find the island where the zombie. And it's very kind of schlocky at times, but like the effects are so good and like so bloody and gory. And there's like a scene where a zombie comes out the ground, and there's like I don't know if they are real, but I'm assuming that they're real because they look real, like maggots in the zombie's eyeball, and you can like see them moving, which I imagine would have been very difficult to have done as like a puppet, which makes me think it's probably like real.
I think they
Um,
were using like cow's eyes or sheep's eyes or something. Go on.
yeah. Oh, it's like I say, it's so cool. It's so. But anyway, they as is want to do, and hopefully this won't ruin the film for anyone. They escape the island and they come back to New York, right? I'd like to think that if you were going to watch a film about zombies, you probably had a 50-50 chance about whether or not they were gonna survive or not. And in this case, they get off the island, right? But they get off the island and the radio kicks back in, and then all these like transmissions start to come through to the radio that are like the city's been overrun by zombies. Everything's going to chaos. This is like an emergency. So and it's like, oh my god, what this is like so cool that this has been going on like around the horror film that you've been watching, and it's like I can't, like, I'm sure there's loads of instances of that happening, but I personally can't think of other ones where it's like, whilst you were watching this very short, like this very minutiae amount of characters, actually this was happening everywhere else, and I think that that's so cool. And then what happens is the camera then goes above the boat and then pans up across to the Brooklyn Bridge, and like pans to where you can see all the framework, and then you can see this army of zombies that are approaching on the city of Manhattan. And every time I watch that, I'm like, that has got me so pumped for like what would have happened at the end of this film. But there is nothing at the end of this film, so I've got no choice other than to just stick it on again. And I genuinely can't think of any other horror film that happens with. But I love it so much.
It's a hell of a movie. If I'm correct, and I may be wrong, I think that they did not have permission for that final shot on the bridge, if I'm not mistaken. And so it was like going rogue. We're just going to get this when we can. Also, this movie has a super infamous zombie shark battle.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
Where a zombie, I mean, it's an impressive feat when you think it's a real shark, and the
Yeah.
makeup, the zombie makeup held up underwater for God knows how long this actor had to be under there. It looks. I just ordered a T-shirt from, I think it was Gutter Garbs. It hasn't arrived yet, of the zombie shark battle.
Oh yeah, well, do you know what? Before when I was like it's very schlock, right?
That's it.
And that was what I was thinking of when I said that. But I was like, I don't want to go into it as a zombie shark battle, because I was like, if I go into that, that's going to completely take me off track.
Yeah.
For and I'm already aware the story requires for me to tell about the whole film in order to talk about that final shot. But yeah, I've looked into that scene, and the person who played the zombie that fights the shark is apparently the shark's trainer. Um, and they like massively overfed the shark, and that's part of the reason why when you watch it, and like once you know that, you can basically see that this zombie is basically hugging this shark, and this shark's like, get off. Two, I've got meat sweats right now. Get off.
Oh no, it's a terrific film. It's an absolute classic. Absolutely
Yeah.
brilliant. I think my recommendation. So I have this fascination with Linda Blair post The Exorcist,
Mm.
right? Because she delivers this incredible performance. I believe she was Oscar nominated for it, and then never gets another chance to make another good movie after that, right? So every time I come across a Linda Blair horror movie from like the 80s, I have to watch it, right? Oh, she was also in, was it Roller Boogie, the roller skating uh comedy romance as well. Anyway, a few years ago I discovered Summer of Fear, which was a made for TV movie that Wes Craven directed. And in this, she is not the person possessed, it's somebody else. And so that's kind of, they're all schlocky and they're not very good. And she's not really, I hate to say it, but I just don't know how talented of an actress she really was post The Exorcist. But so I just watched a movie called Witchery, and it stars
Mm.
David Hasselhoff and Linda Blair, and it takes
Mm.
place in a haunted old hotel on an island, and there's a witch. There's a witch and a ghost, and it is, I believe I watched it on Screambox. It is absolutely worth watching if you're in the mood for some lukewarm at best acting and some pretty bad special effects, which are two things that I really enjoy late at night when I get home from work trying to unwind before bed.
You saying that about Linda Blair, it made me go like I think that's possibly one of the kind of almost pitfalls of horror, is that I think it has the potential to like typecast you a little bit,
Yes.
because possibly because the genre is like so kind of defined in kind of its tropes. But like it reminded me of like Bela Lugosi, who got like
Mm-hmm.
massively typecast after Dracula, and he wasn't. I think it like affected his mental health a lot, and it just made me go, oh, I wonder how like Linda Blair, like if she's like fine with that, or like not very happy with the fact that kind of Exorcist has like dominated like her career.
I think she's come to terms with it. I think she fought it for a long time. If I understand, she went through kind of a battle with drugs in her youth as well, like so many young actors did and continue to. She now the only time that she will make an appearance and kind of sign merchandise at a convention or anything, her fee goes toward her animal charity. And so she charges a lot of money, and it's in the name of, she'll auction off signatures and stuff, and it's all in the name of raising money for her animal charity, which I think is admirable.
Mm.
I think, and I'm not following the news on David Gordon Green's new Exorcist trilogy because I don't trust him after what he did to Halloween. But I believe she was definitely on set. I think she's making an appearance in the film, and I believe her entire pay for that, she only agreed to do it if they would pay her charity, which I think
Wow.
is super admirable, right? She probably
Yeah.
lives a comfortable enough life that, this is what she's passionate about, and she wants to help the world. And so I love that for her. I really love that about her. And it's
Mm.
fun to go back and watch some of the really disappointing movies that she was put in. Anthony Perkins, the same thing happened to him. Norman
Yeah.
Bates, he had, a kind of an established career before Psycho. And after that, it's kind of all that he could, make. Now, the Psycho sequels, that's a franchise that I love. I actually think that every movie in the first one's a masterpiece. It's perfect, right? The other ones are not nearly as good, but they're all very different. And I respect that about that franchise. And he appeared in all of them. He even directed the third one.
Yeah. I mean, I have I've never seen the other ones, but I have read, like the plot summaries for the other Psycho, and I agree with you. I think it's like so well done. I mean, I like a lot of Hitchcock. Like Vertigo is, some people say is like the perfect film, and
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a little thing that I learned about Psycho was that so Hitchcock shot it on 50 millimeter lens, which was very unusual for the time, and the reason why he did that was I think one to kind of save costs, and that's also one of the reasons why it's in black and white. But it's also because it was a lens that people were not used to seeing films on. Throughout the film, there's like a sense of like uneasiness
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the what you're watching at all times. If I'm right, it's the same lens that they used on TV, and there was a thinking behind it that using a TV lens in a theater would again add to a certain amount of like unease and this kind of feeling of like, oh, this feels familiar yet also unfamiliar at the same time. And like I love stuff like that. And that's the thing that again I love about horror films, that it's like I think you would struggle to find another genre that is able to make you feel things on like such a guttural level.
Yeah.
Uh, and yeah, I just love stuff like that.
Yeah, God, I need to do an episode on that movie. I'm intimidated to do an episode on that movie. I'll get there one day. But listen, I could talk horror to you all day, but we came here to talk about Shaun of the Dead. What do you say we go Rick or treating?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. Shaun of the Dead, 2004, British horror movie directed and written by Edgar Wright, co-written by Simon Pegg, who stars as well as the titular character Shaun. The film also stars Nick Frost as Ed. We have Kate Ashfield as Liz, Lucy Davis as Diane or Di, Dylan Moran as David, Peter Serafinovich as Pete, and I'm only going to bring this up because he's Timothy Spall's son, which I didn't know. Rafe Spall as
Mm.
Noel, who works in the electronics store, who since this film, he was an unknown at this film, has had a real glow up and is kind of a babe now. And he starred in The Big Short and he returned in Hot Fuzz. So, and The Ritual, which was a horror film that I absolutely loved. Netflix horror film. So this movie is the first in what has become known as the Cornetto trilogy.
Yeah.
Cornetto being an ice cream treat that we don't have in America. If there's anything that we have similar, we call it's a drumstick. So it's like a frozen ice cream in a kind of a waffle cone dessert, basically, right?
Why is it called a drumstick?
I don't know because it's shaped like I think maybe because we call like a chicken leg, we call that a drumstick, and it's like a little bit like that shape.
I mean, It's been over 300 years since you got independence from this country, and I don't know what you've been doing in that time.
Well, playing the drums, I guess. All right, but wait, then why is it called a cornetto?
So it's called a cornetto because it's actually it's an Italian word, I believe, for little horn. So it looks like a little cone.
Yeah.
It's about the size of your hand. So that's why it's called a cornetto. But why they went with an Italian name in the UK, I don't know. But yeah, they're pretty big over in the UK.
Well, Edgar Wright was inspired to include a cornetto in this film
Mm,
because that is his hangover cure,
mm.
as it turns out. Which I guess in my drinking days, I don't drink anymore, but I would definitely eat a lot of ice cream to get over it. It's like the sugar the next day, right? To kind of
Yes.
yeah.
Um, um, I'd say my perfect hangover cure is I'd always try and remember to drink a pint of water before I went to bed.
Right.
So like I'd do that in preparation, but failing that, it's quite common over here to have what's called a full English, which is actually referenced in Hot Fuzz, the sequel. I think, if I'm right. Um, and again, I don't know how popular they are over in the US, but it's like sausage, bacon, eggs, um, uh, black pudding, beans, toast. It's just like I'm saying this right. I used to go to America a lot when I was a kid. I feel like I've just described like a really low, like down item on a Wendy's menu.
So you can get like a full English breakfast at like a pub, right? But
Yeah,
at least in New York, you go to any Irish pub and they're going to have that option for you. I personally don't do black pudding. I can't. It doesn't it's not something that I enjoy. And
It-
yes, it is because I know what it is.
yeah.
and
I was gonna say, is it because you're like, oh, do you know what? I don't really fancy a deep fried scab
yeah,
for my. That's not gonna help my hangover.
I'm an adventurous eater and I will try anything. And then if I don't like it, I don't return to it. I also don't eat eggplant and I can't abide lychee fruit. So, I have my limitations and black pudding is definitely on there.
And I think that is entirely fair. I have yet to find an American food that I have not just added to my cholesterol level with.
Well, we do know how to cook in lard and fry things and add copious amounts of sugar to everything. So there's a reason it tastes so good. As I mentioned, the film came to us from the UK. It was filmed on a budget of 6.1 million and it brought in 30 million, which doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot. That's 5 times the film's budget. It
Mm.
was a massive hit in the UK and was originally only going to get a video release here in America. And was the word of mouth became such a big thing that it was almost like film goers demanded it. And thank God they did because this movie was a huge hit in America as well. I was working at a movie theater at a dollar theater when this came out, and all right, I have a disappointing confession to make to you. I didn't see this movie until about 10 years ago. I missed the boat. All my friends were raving about it, and I remember when I was working at this discount movie theater. Oh no. Oh, Tom's making a real disappointed face.
I just think I've just never seen anyone get fired from his own podcast before.
Thanks for coming trick or treating. You can. I resign. That's it. And with that, that's the show's over.
At that point, there you should play your credit jingle to see if
Yeah.
anyone's like, "Is it really? Is it really over?"
All right. You know what? That's brilliant. I'm gonna do it. I'm ashamed to say it. But then when I did finally see it, the hype did not disappoint, at all. This movie blew my mind. I have to say, I've been wanting to talk about this one for a while. It's intimidating because there is something funny almost every 30 seconds and then suddenly it gets really sad. When I rewatched this the other day, it made me cry and I forgot how sad it gets, and then you start laughing again. And it's there's just so much detail in this
Mm.
movie that you can watch this a million times and you're going to notice something new every time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, apparently, I've only seen pictures of it, but apparently, like Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, like they have like massive, like flip charts with their like script synopsises, and they like go through it, and it's like super detailed. So I think I think that's part of Edgar Wright's like methodology to have it like be super detailed as well. Um, but I mean, I agree with you. It's like it just hits like a narrative beat or a comedic beat or a horror beat or like and when I say like I was gonna say like the other side of the coin, but like those sad moments I think are done in the best like comedy franchises, and like those are really the ones that like proper stay with you. Like everybody remembers, if you watch Futurama, the episode where Fry's dog like waits for him until he like collapses in the street.
It's
Um,
so sad.
it is like sometimes when I'm going back through it, I have to like go, am I in the place to be able to watch this one or skip this one? But
Yeah.
like those sad moments, like when like Sean finally like accepts his dad, when his mum turns, like these are like that dog in Futurama moment, but like multiple times. And I think that really speaks for how good the film is, because like I think that Futurama would only be able to, it only does that once, and this is able to do it multiple times across a film.
Yeah.
Like how good are they at taking you on that journey that they're able to give you that gut punch multiple times and bring you back from it as well.
Well, and it speaks volumes to the talent of the director and the actors, right? This
Mm.
Simon Pegg to take us all over this film, up and down and through, and then to deliver such a just a really the movie just kind of gut punches you and you don't see it coming, when it gets heavy, and it, it's just it's just a heartbreaking moment. You know what? I'm going to wait until we get to that part. I will say this movie stemmed from a British series called Spaced,
Yes.
that Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright had worked on together. Can you
Mm.
give us a little blurb about that? Because I, as an American, I'm not familiar with it.
So Spaced, well, I was going to bring that up myself just now, actually. So Spaced was a sitcom. It was on Channel 4. I want to say it was one series, maybe two, but it basically ended on a cliffhanger. And there've been people there's like an ardent community around it, wanting it to come back, and it's got like early seeds of what Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright and Nick Frost was in it as well, and she was then Jessica Stevenson, who now goes by Jessica Hines, um, who has like a brief cameo in Shaun of the Dead. So she plays, do you know the bit where they come across like another group of survivors, and Sean
Yeah.
knows, and it's a female. So that's the other main character from Spaced.
Okay.
Well, the other main actor, should I say, from Space. So it's like a little homage to that. But it's about two people who are living in a flat share, and they have to lie about being a couple, um, in order to get the flat share, but the landlord lives downstairs, so it's a bit like Three's Company. I don't know why I said that, because I've never seen Three's Company, but that's what I imagine it's like. But this kind of like them having to kind of live. I know it's about like kind of like having like a bit of a lie and kind of having to stick to this lie, and then
Mm-hmm.
having to kind of wrap knots around it. But because it's got this element of pop culture and this kind of alternative, surreal humor to it, along with Edgar Wright's direction style, it takes like a massively different direction with it. And I think that's one of the reasons why it's so popular, because it's so unexpected where it goes, and the fact that it ended on a cliffhanger. Like there will always be some people who want to see it return.
Sure.
Um, Similar to when Futurama ended, and like if I remember right, the first time it ended, Fry and Leela weren't together. Uh, so Simon Pegg and Jessica Hines' character aren't together. So I think that there's like an element of them wanting to kind of wrap that story up as well.
Sure.
But yeah, it's basically a surreal, dark, what I imagine is Three's Company.
It I haven't seen Space, so I can't confirm that or not. But there was, I believe it's from what I read, the third episode of Space is about zombies, where Simon Pegg's character does a bunch of speed and gets drunk and plays video games. He plays Resident Evil, and in all of
Mm.
that combination, starts hallucinating zombies around his house, and so he goes to war with these zombies. And people have said that that's kind of where the idea for Shaun of the Dead stemmed. Of course, we get the title from the George A. Romero classic, Dawn of the Dead,
Mm.
who George Romero saw this film and loved it. He was sent a private screening of it. Oh my God, I have so many facts to get through before we get into the plot of this film. Sent a private screening of it and loved it. He loved the references and was such a fan that he actually put Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in Land of the Dead just a couple
Yeah,
years after this. So they play zombies in that, which I think is pretty fun.
yes. Although I don't want to be one of those. Well, actually, I think it's actually Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright rather than Simon Pegg and Nick Frost.
Yes, that is correct. I am so sorry. Thank you for.
It's all right. I don't want to be coming across as a
No, no, no.
nitpicky dick. But but yeah. So those two. Um, Again, you've probably got this on your list of like facts, but um, the video store that Simon Pegg works in, the electronic shop's called Forey Electrical,
Yeah.
which is a reference to Ken Forey, who played the dad in Keenan and Kel. A
And was
little.
also in Dawn of the Dead.
Oh, what?
Yeah, yeah,
This is
yeah.
news to me.
There's also is it Fulci's Pizza Place is mentioned in this?
Out of zombie flesh eaters who we mentioned
Exactly.
before.
Yeah.
Um, um, but yeah, it's what I was going to say before about like space. Like, um, for me, like Shaun of the Dead, like it's so influential, and you can like see how much it like catapults both Simon Pegg and Edgar Wright like into Hollywood. So for me, it feels like the springboard. Like internationally, it feels like the springboard, but in the UK, I feel like you could never say Shaun of the Dead is the springboard because you can trace it further back to space, and you can definitely see that evolution. And just because it's not as big in America, I think that most people would say, "Oh, Shaun of the Dead's what launched them both," but actually, like Spaced is so ardently like loved in the UK that to not mention it, like I imagine I would have like my friends go, "I listened to that podcast, and you didn't say that Spaced was the launching pad." Like that's how much people love it.
Wow. I've really now knowing more about it, I really do want to see it. We have a subscription service here called BritBox, and I have
Mm.
to wonder if it's available on that or not.
I would guess it is. It's one of those, like I say, it's like it's so big, and it's like such a kind of cult thing in the UK. Like I imagine if you wanted to, you could probably pick up like a DVD, like somewhere probably makes
Sure.
DVDs for UK expats that are living in the US.
Totally.
Um, but yeah, and then to link that back to like George Romero, I think like I love George Romero's films, like Night of the Living Dead, Dawn of the Dead, Day of the Dead. Like I love them all. I actually watched Night of the Living Dead in. I don't know if you've got these in America, but this has been set up. There's like a zombie cinema, maybe about 30 miles away from where I live.
Okay.
And what happens is it's a drive-through cinema, um, and on the way up to the cinema, you you drive up, and it's You have like zombies like coming to like attack your car and stuff.
What?
Yeah. It's called Camelot Rises because it used to be a night themed um uh theme park, and it closed down and they reopened it as if it had been overrun by zombies. So you drive along, it's about a mile of zombies, and like you'll get stopped by people in army gear who are like, oh, you need to stop. There's like zombies in the area, and then like they're all obviously actors, but like they'll then come in and like eat the actors, and then the zombies will like attack your car, and like they'll be like, you need to go, you need to go, you need to get out of here, and then you'll like see out the back, them like spraying them and them going down, and then you eventually get to the cinema. And they play like old horror films.
Oh
So
my
like when I went to
God.
watch it, it was Night of the Living Dead. And then what they did was midway through the film, they were like everybody needs to like lock your cars, because and then obviously all these zombie actors like come and like hoard the cars for a little bit until the army actors come and then like shoo them all off, and then they play the second half of the film. So yeah, so a little plug for that. It's called Camelot Rises, and that's in the north of England.
That sounds like the coolest possible movie going experience I can think of. Holy
Oh,
cow.
oh, it's so sick. It's so good.
Man, that's brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. Well, hey, all right, we are almost an hour into this and we need to get into the plot of this movie, yeah? What do
Oh,
you
do you
say?
know what? When I do my Pokemon podcast, my co-host is always like, "We are rambling." So I apologize for bringing that into your
No,
podcast.
none of this is rambling. I don't think I'm cutting a single thing that we've talked about so far, so don't
Oh, thank you.
worry. Yeah. So the film opens with some music actually from Dawn of the Dead, the official soundtrack. I think it's a section that was composed by Goblin. And then it cuts into the specials Ghost Town, which is a really cool, spooky song that's actually about kind of urban decay. And
Yeah,
it kind of
about
became like
a town called Coventry.
yes, yeah. So very, very fitting soundtrack. And we fade into Sean with his girlfriend Liz and her friends slash roommates David and Di, and they are at the Winchester, which is kind of their hub. It's a pub,
Mm.
really massive, cool looking pub in the middle of London. Or is this the north of London? Where in London are they?
Say again where it was on the thing.
Crouch End.
It's kind of from the sounds of things. It's kind of more in the like sticks. It feels like a little bit
Okay.
like harder to get to versus central London, which would kind of make sense because if it was central London, they'd probably be getting like more public transport places,
Right.
whereas
Sure.
they're shown getting cars everywhere.
Yeah. Okay. Sure. So they are seated at the Winchester, and it's almost like a borderline intervention of trying to encourage Sean, who has a cigarette in one hand and a pint of beer in the other,
Mm.
to get his life together. And, I think it's very clear from the start that they're not nagging him, they're trying to encourage him.
Mm.
Liz, his girlfriend, clearly has feelings for him, but you can also sense that she's kind of coming to the end of her rope a little bit. There's, there's a it's clear that Sean is not a huge fan of David and Di, Liz's
Mm.
flatmates and friends, um, at all.
Mm.
And they're clearly not a fan of Sean either. They certainly think that Liz can do a lot better than him.
Yeah, I tell you what is interesting about both of those castings. So I'm guessing that both Lucy Davis and Dylan Moran are not very well known in the US,
No.
but they are, as part of those two characters, they're very much playing against type for both of those. Like Dylan Moran to the point where often when I watch Dawn of the Dead, Shaun of the Dead, uh, like whenever he turns up, I'm always like, oh, do you know? I always forget that Dylan Moran's in this. So like
Really?
Dylan Moran normally, so he's famous for a sitcom called Black Books, which is set. It's like a dark comedy set in a bookshop, and he often plays like very kind of dry wit, very put upon, like sick of the world kind of people. Whereas David is like very much not that. He's a bit of a kind of spineless, it's like it's revealed that he's like in love with Sean's girlfriend like
Hmm.
midway through, and he's like lying to himself. And so Lucy Davis is famous for being in The Office, the UK Office, and
Oh, okay.
she played a character called Dawn, which would eventually be turned into Pam in the US version. So she was very much the kind of every woman type character, and again her character in that is very much not that. So they are in this film. It's quite an unusual piece of casting for both of those to be playing those characters, because you would think that actually Lucy Davis would play Sean's girlfriend, given her previously playing Dawn stroke Pam,
Got
and
it.
Dylan Moran would likely have played the Pete character, because they're much more suited to those roles. But
Yeah.
like they hit both out the park.
They're incredible. Di is an actress, an aspiring actress.
Mm,
And then David he's like an accountant. Is that correct?
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So they bring up, you know, Sean, you'd be doing a lot better if it weren't for Ed. And Ed turns out to be Sean's lifelong friend since they were children,
Mm,
played by Nick Frost, who is the epitome of just unmotivated and
mm,
just, lazy.
mm,
And we all know an Ed, right? We all
mm.
know an Ed. I think there have been points in my life where I have been the Ed in the friend group for sure.
um, well, I mean, I think that Simon Pegg and Nick Frost in this film, they almost kind of accentuate how good some of the other casting choices are, because they play their roles like so well, and like Nick Frost plays that role so well. But for me, apart from World's End, I feel like most of the time when you watch Nick Frost, he does a spin on more or less the same thing, and that's not like a knock against him, but like Nick Frost, for me is the kind of, although he's so solid, it's like it's it it's you just kind of, for me he's just kind of playing Nick Frost in it,
Sure. Yeah.
and that's
He's
not to
got
say that Nick
he's
Frost is lazy and all that but yeah, I feel like he's playing kind of himself in
I
that
mean,
film.
he's got a brand. Jack Black is the same in every
Mm,
single movie that you watch him in. And I
yeah.
can't stand him in any single movie that I've watched him in, but I do enjoy Nick Frost. So we move on from this introductory scene at the Winchester to our opening credits. And it's really clever choreographed. It's a continuous pan from left to right, and
Mm,
it showcases the mundaneness and kind of zombified state of living that humans actually go through, because we have a man pushing shopping carts,
mm,
and then it shows the checkout counters at a supermarket, and called Landis Supermarket, by the way, reference to John Landis, of course, who
mm,
directed another famous horror comedy, American Werewolf in London. And all of all the women running the checkout counter are moving in almost unison, right? Kind
mm,
of scanning items in almost unison. Also, the woman in the front, the woman in the foreground has a name tag named Mary, and we will see her later on. A lot of the people in this opening sequence we will see later on as zombies, which I think is
mm.
pretty clever. A line of people waiting for the bus, and they all check their watches at the same time. One of those zombies come back. We see a group of kind of punk youths walking up an alley and bobbing their heads, and that's when we get our title card, Shaun of the Dead.
Mm. Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the thing that I mean, I don't know about yourself, but like zombie films are generally my kind of, I think my favorite type of horror films, and I think part of it is because they are able to make these comments on society
Oh yeah.
that Shaun of the Dead's making. But I'm fairly certain I'm not I'm fairly certain that is like a reference to Dawn of the Dead, in terms of the way that the people are acting, because from what I read, the reason why Dawn of the Dead came out was because George Romero was in a shopping mall and was like, I felt like everyone was acting like zombies because they were just so kind of like out of it in the real world.
Yeah.
And like I say, I've not looked it up, but I imagine that that's like a homage to that kind of mindset and how he came up with Dawn of the Dead. Um, but to highlight that, I think a lot of people do go through their lives and they do these things without necessarily thinking about them, and how they're kind of marching slowly forward without any real purpose is like again, I can't think of any other type of fiction that is able to show you that message so clearly and so cleverly.
Yeah. No, it they do an incredible job, and they keep it funny. Our montage continues until it finishes up on a pair of feet shuffling into view on a bathroom floor. And, really looks like a zombie's taking their steps. Pan up the body, and we see Shaun yawning and making like a noise as he's waking up and starting his day. We get this montage of like, you know, toothbrush and breakfast and tie being put on, and it's almost like in an action movie when it would show someone kind of gearing up with all of their weaponry and their guns and their bullets, and it's kind of like that, but it's just mundane every morning things.
Yeah. And you'll see echoes of that if you get around to watching Spaced. So like in Spaced, Nick Frost's character is like obsessed with the army, and he often wears like camo gear. And so you'll see where they kind of got the inspiration for those kind of shots and sequences from Spaced. But I mean, I mentioned in the interview that we did previously, the thing that I think is so amazing about Shaun of the Dead is that it's as if Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg went, okay, so we want a film that's going to be 50% horror and 50% comedy, and they went, right, let's like slice it up. So it's like so there's like a tiny bit of horror in the beginning, and it's like 10% horror at the beginning and like 10% comedy at the end, and then kind of slowly start blending them together until it's almost like a seamless transition across the two. And that's the thing that I like love about the film. I mean, we'll go into it like later, but like, when they are in the basement of the pub and everything's like on fire above them, and like whenever I watch that, I'm like, right, this is like full on horror film now.
Yes.
Like, and like the way that he's managed to seamlessly transition across the two without you particularly picking up on it changing in tone, like he's like a genius. He's like so good.
It knows when it needs to be funny, it knows when it needs to be scary, and it knows when it needs to be tender. It actually coined the phrase rom-zom-com.
Yeah.
Romantic zombie comedy, which I think is pretty brilliant.
Yeah.
So we meet Shaun and Ed's flatmate Pete, who has a business job, and he's a grown-up, and he's pretty upset because Shaun left the front door open last night again when they came home late. He scolds him on that, and he tells, he says, you have to do something about Ed. He lays on his ass all day. He doesn't do anything. And we see Ed playing video games. He's playing a shooter game, and Shaun is giving him these directions, right? Like 3:00 over your shoulder. And he uses these same directions later on in the pub when they're shooting zombies, like word for word. It's fucking brilliant.
Yeah, it's so good. Like the amount of like mirrored like sequences and scenes that they do across this film and across the trilogy, I think is like, it's brilliant. And I think part of that is because they've got such a like intricate process where they blow it up onto these flipboard charts, where I imagine that they're able to go, okay, so we did that bit with the gun, and then later on we've got a gun in it. Let's see if we can like transition across those scenes and do callbacks and references across the same film. Like honestly, like I'm not surprised that Edgar Wright has become like so successful, given like how like meticulous he is.
I've never seen Baby Driver. Thanks for coming trick-or-treating. You can...
And that's the second time that you've been fired from your own podcast.
It is high on my list. I haven't gotten to it yet. All right, so now Pete is talking to or to Ed directly, and he's like, "You have to clean up. Will you please just clean up around here?" And then when he turns around to leave, on the back of his blazer, Ed has written a sign that says, "I am a prick." And he says, "I'm not doing anything for that man." We get a phone call from Liz, and she's saying, "Hey, did you get reservations for our 3rd anniversary at this restaurant that I really want to go to?" And he says, "Oh yeah, sure, I got it, no worries," and heads out to the corner store. And he asks Ed, "Can I get you anything?" And Ed says, "Cornetto, please." So that's where we get our intro into the Cornetto trilogy. This walk is very well choreographed, very well shot. It's one continuous shot, and it begins with Shaun opening his gate and heading out into the street, where he is hit in the head with a soccer ball by a kid. He tells the kid, "Hey, you're dead." He crosses the street, and there's a bum walking toward him and asking him for change, which he gives him. The bum has a dog with him. And then he almost gets hit by a car, and he passes by a man washing the windshield on his car. He trips up the curb and passes a jogger. There's a man collecting the trash. And then he enters the corner store, and this is a clever detail. He grabs a Diet Coke out of the cooler and then puts that back and grabs a regular Coke. And that'll come into play a little bit later. You see a man in a tuxedo behind him, and he pays, I think his name is Nelson, the man who owns the corner store. It's a very specifically shot montage with very specific points that will come into play later. Now, he is on the bus to work, and he sees a person out the window collapse at the bus stop. This is where the film takes inspiration from another one of your very favorite films, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in that in the background of the movie, all of this fishy stuff is happening, right? Kind of suspect goings on are happening all around the character, and he just doesn't notice it, which is very much the 1970s version of Invasion of the Body Snatchers.
Oh, so good.
He gets to his job. He works in an electronics store, and he's not even the manager or like second in charge. Like the manager and the second in charge are out sick today, so he's like 3rd in line, and he's trying to like lead a team meeting, and there's this punk named Noel.
Is it worth also mentioning that again? I think that that links into that Invasion of the Body Snatchers. Like the implication is that they have been bitten.
That the people have been bitten.
The manager and the assistant manager are sick.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It's another detail of people out sick. One of his coworkers, Noel, who's this punk like 17-year-old, he's a total jerk. So this is another detail, right? Earlier in the film, Ed makes a phone call and talks about like, "No, I haven't got any Henry," or he's clearly making a drug reference. And then Noel answers the phone and talks about, "No, I called him. He doesn't have any Henry." So Ed is Noel's drug dealer, which is clever, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, Noel gives him a hard time, and Shaun says, "I've got things I want to do with my life." And Noel hits him with, "When?" And it's real sad because I can relate to the face that Shaun makes. And then he looks at his shirt and he says, "You've got red on you," which it's coming from his red pen that's in his pocket that it's leaking. And so it kind of looks a little bit like a blood stain on his white shirt. He is flipping channels, trying to sell people a TV, and flipping past all of these news stories of like world news of people in biohazard suits and a worldwide plague, and he's not paying any attention to what's on the TV. It also shows a couple on a talk show talking about how in love they are. They show up again at the end of the movie, and he's interrupted by Noel, who
I never knew that.
No, exactly. Yeah, so they are at the end, the woman who's still in love with her zombie husband, that's them. So he's interrupted by Noel, who says, "Your dad is here." Well, it's his stepdad, played by Bill Nighy, who is a genius in everything that he does.
Yeah. He's in every one of the Cornetto trilogy. But people sometimes miss the fact that he's in The World's End because he only appears in that as a voiceover. But yeah, he's like considered a bit of like a British national treasure, they call it over here.
Yes, that's exactly. I mean, I would consider him an international treasure.
But yeah, he's so he is one of those people who it's like that people he's got that kind of again I don't know what he's like in the US, but in the UK I think the consensus is that he's like one of those people who's like always been cool.
Sure. I would say Americans know him most for this and the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise
Mm,
and Love Actually are the three probably biggest movies that we know him from over here.
yeah. Yeah, again, that's probably similar over here, but he's like I say, he's got this kind of like cool factor. He's almost like a bit of like I'm gonna say like a modern kind of Michael Caine, but like
Yeah,
I know they're kind of similar age, but it's like he's got that kind of eh, his appearance in anything will kind of be like, oh, this is probably going to be quite an interesting thing if he's attached to it.
he's got a way about him. He's got a little bit of like a Christopher Walken in that there is only one him,
Yeah.
and when you see him in a movie, you feel safe. I know this is going to be enjoyable because Bill Nighy is in it.
Mm.
So he tells Sean it's time for your bi-monthly visit to your mother. Like it's clear that they don't get along at
Yeah.
all.
Again, another thing that I think is worth pointing out that I mean we've just bigged him up as like being like super cool. Again, I feel like this is another role where he's almost kind of playing against type because
Yeah,
he is so kind of like doddering and henpecky in this role. He's like, and it's like he's so well, like he's like so good in it, but it's not the kind of role that I think like if he wasn't well known for being in Shaun of the Dead and you got asked to describe a Bill Nighy role, this is not the role that you would
no,
describe him as.
no, definitely not. It's not his. You're right. It's totally against type.
Yeah.
So he tells Sean, you have to come visit your mom. Sean has this very adolescent reaction to him, like eye rolls and and sighs, and
Mm.
doesn't want to be around him. And he tells him, maybe you could, I don't know, bring the flowers for your mom that you didn't bring on Mother's Day, and don't bring the cheap ones from the garage at the store. Like, you know,
Mm.
Noel gives him some shit for taking a personal visitor at work, and then answers a call from Liz, his girlfriend, who says, "Hey, I wanted to see what time is the reservation at the restaurant." And Sean realizes, "Oh shit, I didn't get a reservation." So he books it, and what's up?
Um, it's just worth mentioning as well that he's not paying full attention in this phone call because he's got was it Noel, the name of the
Yeah,
other employee? He's like had a go at him for being on the phone previously, so he's kind of trying to fob Liz off at this point. So he's not.
right.
Again, this is part of him like not paying attention to things and things getting dropped, which will like come back in a little bit.
Sure, totally. And he runs to a flower shop, gets some flowers for his mom, picks out a card specifically that says "To a wonderful mom," and uh, tries to make a reservation at this restaurant, and they are sold out of reservations. And on his way home, he sees a homeless man. He sees a homeless man eating a bird across the street, like biting the head off of a bird. And then a bus drives by and the man disappears. And then on the bus, it's very subtle. Someone's like coughing behind him, and everyone looks pale and kind
Mm,
of circles around under their eyes. And, are they turning into zombies? Are they not? It could go either way. Now that we've
mm.
gone through a worldwide pandemic, this scene is horrifying to me.
Yeah, totally, totally,
uh,
totally.
Gets off the bus and there's a traffic jam, but he's just walking past this traffic jam, right? He's not like paying any attention to what's going around him, and he runs into a friend named Yvonne, and they catch up. And how are you doing? And he says surviving. And they compare their lives, and it's very clear that Yvonne has progressed further in her life than Sean has. At least, what is success, right? What is
Mm,
success really? But the traditional form of success is she just bought a house and she's married
mm,
or getting married, and he has really nothing fun to share with her. I'm still with Vicky.
mm.
um and meanwhile there's been like a car accident behind them, and they're trying to help the person in the vehicle, but they're not paying attention to this at all. Gets home, calls the restaurant, no more reservations, and Shaun is freaking out about it. And Ed suggests, well, what about the Winchester? Right? We can just go to the Winchester. Well, Liz specifically said, no, I don't want to go to the Winchester again. It's all that we do, you know?
Mhm.
She happens to, he talks to Liz on the phone and explains, I couldn't get the reservation. She kind of like calls him out on it. And then she says, what's the plan then? And Shaun suggests the Winchester, and she's not happy about it.
Yeah,
And
I mean this area again, I think is worth highlighting. So we're like in almost kind of like full on rom com at this point here, in the missed reservation and all that kind of stuff. But it also I think like shows like one of the reasons why Shaun of the Dead works so well, because I think not only does, like what we were saying before, zombie and horror films have the ability to go, oh, that could happen in real life. All this stuff that's happening to Shaun has the potential to happen in real life.
sure.
Because someone was watching you and you chewed them out, or you were in this situation where you weren't able to kind of pay attention, and then that has like knock-on effects for your like relationships or your life at home, and you're not tackling things that are going on in your personal life, all mounting up. Like again, I think that it really like connects deep, like as a film, because it uses both of those genres so well. Like there's something for people to connect to like throughout the entire film, no matter which point of like the genre mashup you're in. And
Yes.
I think it's just so good.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And just great dialogue, aside from the funny jokes. The next scene, Shaun grabs the flowers that are for his mom, which he has them in water in the sink, like in dishwater. Instead of putting them in a vase, he puts them in dishwater in the sink, grabs them out of the sink, books it over to Liz's house, and her David and Di, her flatmates, won't let him up. And we don't
Yeah,
think it's a very good idea. And he says, well, there's a trellis here, I'll just climb up if you won't let me. And tries to climb up the trellis, and he can't he can't climb up the trellis. So they do let him up, and he and Liz get into an argument, and it becomes a really honest breakup conversation,
mm,
right? Where he starts to realize, oh, this is going to be the end,
mm,
and but it's not her yelling at him, it's they sit down and they talk about why, and it feels so grounded and so
mm.
real when it could have just been silly.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
and it makes you don't you see where Liz is coming from, and you sympathize for Shaun, but yeah, he could clean up his act, and it does a great job of not placing all the blame on either of them. They're just
yeah.
not in the same place right now.
And like I don't know about you, but like I think it speaks to how good the, like what you said with the dialogue and the way it's shot and the pacing, that I think for that scene it's very easy to forget that there is a like a wider film going on around it, and a
Yes.
wider threat going on around it. And I think that, if you're one of these people who kind of like connects with like characters and what you're seeing, I think it's very easy to then go, oh, you could see how these characters going through this moment would not notice everything that's going on around them.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
How often do you notice what's going on around you? Like I keep my wits about me. I feel like I have street smarts, and I live in New York, so I'm always alert, but I'm also like, I put my headphones in and I walk down the street, and sometimes you just zone out.
Mm. Yeah.
I mean, when the pandemic came and I saw people wearing face masks for the first time, I was like, what the hell is, why?
Mm.
Like, I didn't take it as seriously as I should have at the time. And he's seeing newspapers with warnings about this, but he's not taking it seriously. So he meets up with Ed at the Winchester, and he's like in tears, and he's just got this. Simon Pegg is such a great actor. He's just got this defeated sensibility to him.
Mm.
And Ed is trying to cheer him up. He does his gorilla impression, which is a really good monkey impression. Like, holy cow. And he suggests to him, he comes up with a game plan for the next day. And he says, how about this? Tomorrow we keep drinking. We wake up, Bloody Mary in the morning, then a bite at the King's Head, couple at the Little Princess. We stagger back here for shots at the bar, which is exactly what happens tomorrow because Bloody Mary is in their garden the next morning. A bite at the King's Head. Bill Nighy gets bit in the neck. Couple at the Little Princess. They go pick up Liz and her flatmates, and then they stagger back to the Winchester for what? Shots. Gunshots. Yeah. It's so good. There's a point when Ed insists that dogs can't look up, which is ridiculous and hilarious. And he tries to console him, but he's really not very good at it. But his little speech ends with, "It's not the end of the fucking world." And right when he says that, a hand kind of like bangs on the window of the pub, and the barkeep says, "We're closed," and the hand kind of like trails away. They talk about how there is a rifle, like a shotgun, above the bar, and they go back and forth about, is it loaded? Is it not? Is it locked? And Ed insists that this thing is loaded, and Shaun says there's no way. It couldn't possibly be.
Yeah, that for me, the point where the hand hits the door is the first point where this ventures into actual like full-on horror film at that point.
Now it's horror movie.
Yeah, like at that point, and at that point there, I feel like that's the beginning of the. It's already been transitioning, but at that point there, I feel like we're about to like ramp up into this being more zombie stroke horror film than it is rom-com. Like the rom-com elements, I feel, start to not diminish, but they start being replaced with the horror elements from that point on.
Yes, absolutely. They walk out of the pub, and behind them there's a man and a woman. It looks like they're making out, but as soon as they turn their backs, she like chews on his neck and he collapses to the ground. And they're singing White Lines by Grandmaster Flash, and they're crossing a street, and the points in the song where someone should go freeze, drop, a zombie moans behind them, and I think it's fucking hilarious because I think it's so funny, but they still don't recognize him as a zombie. They just think he's fucked up.
Yeah. Oh, well, I'll tell you what, as a little bonus piece of trivia, so the Walking Dead directors, at least in the early scenes, I don't know if they carried on doing this, but when they got actors in to be zombie extras, what they would do as part of the research and development is they would take them to pubs and nightclubs at kicking out time so they can study the way that people walked as they were like so inebriated that they had stayed at a venue until it was closing time.
That's brilliant.
Yeah, so like I think that's like a really good observation that some people could mistake like a zombie off in the distance as being someone who is very drunk if they are coming at the end of a night out.
Yeah, that's really smart. I have definitely had plenty of practice myself in that walk for sure. All right, so they go home and they start blasting records, DJing electro kind of jock jams music, and acting crazy and wild. And Pete, the flatmate, busts into the room and he's super mad and he shatters the record. And Shaun says, "Hey, that was the second record I ever bought." And Pete says, "We have to go to bed. It's 4 a.m. And Shaun says, "But it's Saturday." And Pete says, "No, it's Sunday. I have to work in 4 hours." And he's just really mad. And he finishes with, "And you left the door open again." And he's got a bandage on his hand. And Shaun says, "Well, what is that from?" And he says, "I was mugged on the way home. Some homeless man bit me." And it's just this whole we have been in on this as audience members, all the weird stuff happening around, and now this bite mark, we are in on it. We know what's happening, and Shaun still doesn't and isn't putting any of this together.
Yeah. Again, it might be worth mentioning. So Peter Serafinovich, again, he's like, I'd say of the Shaun of the Dead cast, he's probably like the least well known.
Yeah.
But he's kind of he's well known amongst kind of like comedy nerds in the UK. The biggest thing that I think he has done in the US is he was in an episode of Rick and Morty where he was in the Pickle Rick episode, where he played the like English businessman who's like the parody of the villain from John Wick. But he in Shaun of the Dead is very much playing against type because he's known for being like quite silly. So for him to be playing this flatmate character, again, is very much going against type. And this might be me overthinking it, but I'd like to think part of it is that Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg wanted, similar to with Hitchcock, to have all these elements that are kind of taking you by surprise. It's like, oh, there's Dylan Moran. Oh, he's not acting like Dylan Moran would. There's Bill Nighy. He's not acting like how Bill Nighy would.
Yeah.
There's Peter Serafinovich, and he's not. So I'm guessing, but like I say, I don't know, that part of that is this kind of like trying to put like a sense of unease in the audience, which I imagine, because they would have had no idea that it would become such an international thing, that they were only picturing like British audiences at that point.
Yeah, sure. No, totally. And it might not have landed in American audiences, but I can totally see that seed being planted for British audiences. Mm. So next morning, Shaun wakes up with a massive hangover, decides he's going to go to the corner store. And we get that same specifically choreographed, specifically shot, like one shot stroll to the corner store. But the world is different now.
This, for me, I don't know about yourself, but I feel like this is the scene where, at least for me, where I feel like probably people watch it and go, oh, actually, this film's got like loads going on, because this is kind of the first like big repeated scene where things have massively changed, and it's so visual that I think that at that point there, if you weren't already, it clues you in to go, actually, there's so much for me to pay attention to in this film, which speaks about the kind of wider kind of story that they're trying to tell, of like pay more attention, but also in terms of the film, I think it's the beginning of, because people who love Shaun of the Dead go, oh, I could like rewatch it and I find out new things every single time, and I think that this is the first moment that I think that most people who watch the film would go, there's so much for me to dissect now.
Yes, I remember my reaction the first time I watched this to this sequence was, oh shit, that's good. Because it starts the same way that the first one did. It's he opens his gate, except now we see like a zombie behind him, and he just has his head down, hungover. The street is empty this time. The windshield that the man was washing before is now broken. He trips on the curb again, but there's no man collecting the garbage. We see zombies shuffling in the distance. He goes into the corner store. So last time he reached for a Coke, got a Diet Coke, right? He's going to change his life and make it better by getting a Diet Coke. This time he grabs a Diet Coke, puts it back, and grabs a regular Coke. Fuck it, right? Yeah. Liz broke up with me. But when he opens the cooler, there's a bloody handprint on it, and he doesn't even notice the bloody handprint. And then as soon as he closes it, he slips a little bit, and it's clear he has slipped on blood, and he doesn't even notice that. Behind him, we see Nelson, the man who owns the corner store, and he puts some money on it, and he says, Nelson, I owe you some money. I owe you whatever, 20 cents or whatever it is, and grabs the cornetto as well for Ed and walks out. We see some more zombies. He passes by someone's front door, and there's now a dead person covered in blood in the yard. The homeless man who he gave change to before, who had a dog on a leash, is walking toward him, but there's no dog on the leash, which really, I have to wonder what happened to this dog. But he does not give him change this time. In fact, he kind of pushes him away and says, I didn't have change at the store. Like, he's just not even friendly, and goes back into his flat. He gets home and talking to Ed, and Ed notices there's a girl in our garden. Shaun goes out to investigate. Ed follows him, and it's a woman kind of hunched over and stumbling, and then she turns around and looks at him, and Ed says, oh, she's so drunk. And we know she's a zombie. They don't know she's a zombie. She has a name tag called Mary, and she was the checkout girl in the opening credits at the grocery store. And she starts getting really close. And first they think it's funny that she's so drunk, and, oh, I think she likes you. And then they push her away, and she keeps coming and maybe starts to try to bite at them. And finally, she gets pushed back. I think Ed does it, and she is impaled by kind of a pole that would be for
Mm.
like a basketball or a flagpole.
So my understanding of it is that it's a umbrella stand
Oh,
that we
sure.
would have in the UK. And
Okay,
like I said,
sure.
I don't know how common those are in the US.
Yes, yes, I can picture it. So she gets impaled with that, and they're like, oh shit, we just killed somebody. But then she starts to stand up. And when she stands up, the camera, you can see through her, the hole that it has left in her, almost well, like in Death Becomes Her when Goldie
Mm,
Hawn stands up after being shotgun blasted.
yeah,
And they freak out, obviously.
yeah. The thing that I wanted to point out from earlier is when he goes around to Liz's flat, um, he's like speaking to them through the intercom, but the dialogue like is massively unchanged, where he's like asking to come in, and they're like, "We're not letting you in."
Oh,
But
right.
the context has changed because it's like we're not opening up the door. Previously it was because we think you are like a horrible boyfriend, and now it's we don't want to open up the door because it's dangerous outside. And then Sean is like, well, I'll just climb up the gutter in, but this time potentially because he's got that a bit extra bit of adrenaline, he's able to like make it up
Right.
through the window.
Yep.
um and Sean's mother, I, again, I don't know if how well she's known in the US, but she became known in the UK because she plays the Prime Minister in Doctor who eventually has
She
like
did.
yeah. So and yeah, she's the one that ultimately upsets David Tennant's Doctor Who, um, and he eventually like turns on her because
Yep.
she becomes like a minor antagonist to the Doctor.
I knew I had recognized her. Oh man, yeah, she's great. All right, so they are attacked by another zombie. They throw toasters and junk out of their garage, out of their shed, and then his record collection one by one, chucking records at these two zombies, and then finally get to a point where it's dire, and they grab a cricket bat and a shovel and beat them, and realize in the process, head trauma is what's gonna work on these things.
Yeah, I've always felt like the cricket bat is a bit of a comment on because most zombie films or mainstream zombie films come from America, where there is different gun control laws versus in the UK, where it's incredibly, it's much more difficult to get hold of one, and also be like, it's like zombie apocalypse happens, everybody gets themselves armed up, and then failing that, if they don't have ammunition and guns, they then get baseball bats, which again is not very big in the
Sure.
UK. So I've always felt like the cricket bat is like a bit of a reference to if the zombie apocalypse happened in the UK, that would be our closest kind of thing that we would have in relation to, because we couldn't go for the guns option, so we would then have to go for the baseball bat, which we also don't have, so therefore he goes for a cricket bat.
That's really, yeah. I mean, I guess I didn't put that much thought into it, but that checks out. Yeah, guns are not super prevalent, like at all.
Yes, yeah, it's much more like, I mean, I don't know, because I've never lived in the US, but I'm guessing it's much more difficult in the UK than it is in the US, because like I've, other than on the odd police officer, I've personally never seen one, like,
God, we
ever.
have, I mean, they're everywhere here. It's exactly what you're imagining. All right, so they go in and devise a plan, right? And it's a funny scene. I won't go through every single detail, but we'll go get our mom and stepdad, and then we'll go to Liz's, and then and every they repeat this kind of montage over and over, adding one more step every single time, and the editing is shifted just enough each time to keep it funny and interesting each time. But the plan essentially includes we're going to pick up mom and we're going to pick up
Yeah,
stepdad. And then we're going to go get Liz and her two friends. And then we're going to hole up at the Winchester because it
yeah,
is kind of a
yeah,
compound, right? It's a big space. And it's also a theme of going to what you're used to,
yeah,
clinging to where you feel safe, clinging to, something that it's just what you know. So they when they realize this, they also realize, oh yeah, they're watching the news, right, and getting more information. The newscaster
Yeah.
says the exact same line from Night of the Living Dead: in order to defeat them, trauma to the head or remove the head. It's a great quote, great reference. And then
Yeah.
stay in your homes and don't approach anyone that you don't know. Well, they realize Pete is upstairs, like he's there. And Shaun goes up and sees him in the shower, and he is
Yeah.
naked and he's a zombie and comes after him. Now, simultaneously, they realize they have left the front door open. And so we've got zombies coming in the front door. Pete's behind them. They get to Pete's car, jump in, and as they're starting the car, two things happen. Pete's coming out the front door,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
and Nelson from the corner store is approaching the car. And it's kind of funny because he's got his hand out reaching to Shaun like he wants
Yeah.
the money that he owes him, which I think is kind of clever. And they book it over to Mom's house. And they don't this
Yeah.
situation, the conversation is a good conversation. It's not approached with the same amount of urgency,
Yeah.
I think, as it needs.
Yeah. That's not uncommon. That is not uncommon in the UK.
Also, because there's no parking allowed, Ed just takes the car around the block. Like he's still following traffic signs.
Getting parking tickets is considered quite an annoyance in the UK.
Yeah, same. Parking in New York City is a pain in the ass. So there's a nice bit of dialogue between Shaun and his mom. He's kind of like protecting her sensibilities from everything that's happening. And, he's saying, we have to go, we have to go. And she says, not without your stepfather. They have a conversation about how they've never gotten along, but, he's my husband and he has been for 17 years. And you have to grow up and you have to respect that. While she's saying this, we hear a car crash outside, which you'll only know what it is in a moment. She also mentions, well, your stepfather he's feeling ill, and we should probably get him. I've tried to get him to go to a doctor. He absolutely refuses. He's very stubborn about that, but they finally do convince him to go, and they walk out the house, and there are zombies everywhere, and Ed has crashed Pete's car, and he has a little bit of like a, oh darn it, I guess we'll have to take stepdad's Jaguar now, like almost like he might have done it on purpose so that he gets to drive the Jaguar. Well, so they get in the car, and there's a funny back and forth where he wants to blast heavy metal music, and can you turn that down? And the mom says it is a bit loud, and he listens to mom. And meanwhile, Bill Nighy is not doing well in the back seat, and one thing leads to another.
So he dies when after they've picked up Liz, because the car's full at that point. But so they next go to pick up Liz, where they have that kind of back and forth, which is like the repeat of the dialogue from earlier.
Yes, and so now the car is in fact full, and he keeps the child locks are on, which is going to come into play when they can't get out of the back seat. Bill gets bitten in the neck he has been bitten in the neck by a zombie. And which I love that they won't say the Z, they want the Z word. They won't say the Z word. They're not calling it what it is. And the car spins out of control and comes to a stop. And stepdad delivers this really great, I loved you all along. I just wanted you to grow up and be strong. And I was hard on you for a reason. And then he fucking dies and becomes a zombie, except they can't open the back door. They can't get out. And so Ed gets out, and there's a moment where Ed just stands there, and Liz is like, come on, open the door. So he does. They get out, close it on stepdad behind him, and the heavy metal music is blasting. And Shaun tries to explain to his mom, there's nothing left of him. He's not the same man that he was. He's gone. And then zombie stepdad turns off the radio, and it's like, well, I guess maybe a little bit.
I'm assuming that again is like a reference again to the thought process of Dawn of the Dead, of the kind of because I think they even say in the Dawn of the Dead where like they turn up at the mall, and I think Ken Foree's character's like, they're just kind of looking for like, for what they know. So I imagine that is like a little kind of thread from that. But that's kind of the first dog from Futurama moment where it like really gets like I think it's slightly different from when they split up because I feel like at that point they're in like rom-com territory. So I think it hits differently, and now it's like it's in the middle of horror, and I think to have like a real, I think it's rare to have a gut punch sad moment in the middle of a horror sequence.
Yes. Well, especially one that lands with such poignancy. It's also worth noting that the zombies who bite Bill Nighy are the kind of the punk youths who are nodding their heads during the opening
Mm.
credits. It's the same guys. All right, so they have to abandon the car and their weapons, and they sneak through the London neighborhood, and they come across Yvonne again. And she asks Sean, "How are you doing?" And he says,
Yeah.
"Surviving." And it's kind of funny because every she in her survival group has a doppelganger for every single person that is in Sean's survival group. There's an Ed, there's a mom, there's a
A lot of those are like again like little known like British actors.
yeah, I know. I recognized who's the guy. He's a host on Great British Baking Show.
Um, Matt Lucas.
Yeah, he's like the doppelganger Ed.
Yeah, yeah. So he's one. The other one that jumps out at me is a guy called Reece Shearsmith, who again I don't know if you've come across in this podcast, but so he does a he's part of a group called the League of Gentlemen. And he did a TV show called Psychoville and another one called Inside Number Nine, and they're all very horror inspired comedic works.
Okay.
So like Psychoville particular, so in my opinion, that's like the best of them all. But like Inside Number Nine is like considered like a very cult viewing over here. So like Psychoville is a sitcom about six characters that are being blackmailed and what it is, and like you don't know why they're being blackmailed, and it gets revealed throughout the series that they're all kind of connected to this sanatorium where a murder happened like several years before that got covered up. So if that's, I feel like the listeners of this podcast would very much connect with the work of Reece Shearsmith if they're looking for like more comedy horror type things to consume.
I'll add it to my list. Sounds like my cup of tea,
Mm.
as it were. They tell Yvonne we are going to the Winchester, and she's a little bit like, "Wait, really? Winchester? Are you sure?" But they split ways and wish each other luck. And then in the process, after they after they depart each other, the two groups, they come across a zombie who gets a swing ball pole, which I guess Americans that's like a tether ball
Yeah.
pole essentially. Sean first hits it in the head with the ball, which is obviously not going to work, and then Di and Liz suggest that he impale it, which he does. And now they get this great idea of, holy shit, there are 100 zombies around us. How are we going to get through? Oh, we should act like them. So Di gives them an acting lesson in
Yeah.
how to behave like a zombie, and it's pretty cute. And we cut to them working their way through a crowd of zombies, doing their best to impersonate them. I did notice this time Mom is covering her wrist with her hand while she's getting the acting lesson. She's got her hand up her sleeve and she's covering her wrist.
Oh, does that come in at that point? I'll tell you what I feel like I definitely should mention, because I feel like if I don't mention like afterwards they'll like have a go at me. So I'm a member of Comedy Sports UK, and the manager of Comedy Sports UK, Bron, was in a sequence that got cut from Shaun of the Dead.
No kidding.
So I've actually got a little piece of behind the scenes trivia for Shaun of the Dead,
Tell us all about it.
which I don't think is that well known. I only know this because she's the manager of Comedy Sports, and I've asked her about it. So there was meant to be a sequence where I'm not entirely sure how it would have come up, but there's like around this period there's been like a how do we blend in type sequence, and there was going to be a bit where it was like okay, so they're all going to be like high and like fucked up like what you said, and they were going to Sean was going to imagine a bunch of like raver 1970s style zombies that the manager of Comedy Sports got brought in, and like they filmed that sequence of like all these zombies in like disco gear and like hippie like late 60s through to the 70s style sequence, but it ultimately got cut.
Damn.
But like I say, that's like a piece of trivia that I've never really come across, and it could potentially be a world first breaking on
It's
this podcast. But I
an
know,
exclusive on Rick or Treat Horrorcast.
yeah, but I know that happened because she, like, everybody who knows her knows that she was like an extra in Shaun of the Dead, and she told me that that was the sequence that she filmed, but it ultimately got cut because
Damn. I
I mean,
wonder if the footage exists anywhere.
I don't know. I mean, you'd imagine so, but yeah, that was like a sequence from that segment that ultimately never made it to cinema.
Well, that's really, those are some incredible bragging rights. I was cut out of Shaun of the Dead.
Yeah. Well, actually, I believe her hand was in because they got basically everyone who was like a zombie. I believe the way that they managed to get it done was again because space was so big, they were able to get like fans of Spaced in to like play like the zombies. Like it's well known that the zombies didn't really get paid anything for doing it.
Yes.
Um, and part of the reason why they did that was because like a lot of the crew for Space was involved, and I think that they were very kind of um, like so there's a picture of the manager of Comedy Sports with like Simon Pegg and Nick Frost, like in all the zombie makeup and all that kind of stuff. So I imagine it as part of the you being a zombie in Shaun of the Dead, it was slightly easier for you to interact with the cast because you were doing the cast a favor than it would be on
Yeah,
like a normal set where you're a supporting artist.
sure. I mean, I've always wanted to be even an extra in a heavy prosthetic or heavy makeup production. I think that would be a lot of fun. I'd also like to be compensated for it, let's be honest.
Yeah, oh, totally. Um, but yes, I believe they got like a load of them back. Again, I know this from talking to her. They got a load of them back for the scene where all the zombies at the Winchester, like overrunning the pub. And I
Yeah.
think I want to say you can like see her arm in it when they like rip uh, Dylan Moran to pieces, or when Lucy runs back out the door. But again, that's partly because they were like, okay, all the people who've done it, would you also be available on this day to do the breaking into the Winchester pub?
Which is the fun part.
Yeah.
Like that's the fun part. So they do make it to the Winchester, which is of course surrounded by the dead.
And then my least favorite bit of the film happens when Ed takes that phone call.
Yeah, why don't you talk about it?
Oh, it's just why it's like I just don't understand why he would like. I know it's been set up as like that he's this character who doesn't really care, and he's doing all this stuff, and it does ultimately cause Sean to like snap at Ed. But I just find it really difficult to like justify why he takes that phone call and like ruins the charade for everybody.
And he does, and it does ruin, and it draws the zombies' attention. David breaks a window to get into the Winchester,
Yeah,
and Sean is then forced to lure all of the zombies away as bait.
yeah.
And after the group gets inside, Sean finds out that the zombies have followed him.
Yes. Well, this here. So the scene where when he goes down to the cellar and the he like rolls up the blind and there's all the zombies at the window downstairs.
Yeah.
That for me is the point where it's full on flipped. Like there's up until like later on in the sequence when they insert a little bit more kind of rom-com in there, like it's like full on horror film at that point. Like there's like so much dread, and like it's like there's so much suspense and terror in that we as an audience and Sean knows how like dire the situation is.
Yes. Yeah. It hope gets lost really, really quickly
Yeah.
because they are essentially trapped. Wait, now how does Sean get back into the Winchester?
So he comes back in, again. I don't know what it's like for like American pubs, but it's quite common for. So often pubs are kind of like self-contained buildings.
Like the barrel hatch, right? Like
Yeah,
the hatch in the yeah, we
yeah.
have
So
those in New York all over the place.
yeah, so he comes in through either the beer hatch or comes in through the cellar doors, and
Yes.
then gets in that way. But the zombies have followed him to the cellar doors, um, even though he's like tried to get away. Um, but yeah, that's quite common in the UK for pubs to be like um, their own contained buildings rather than like connected to like rows of houses or blocks of flats.
Okay. Sure. Well, we have a bit of dialogue and we I think my favorite moment is when the how does the jukebox turn on?
So there's a line of dialogue earlier on in the evening where like Sean and Liz's song plays on the jukebox. It can play songs just at random,
Yeah,
and they've sent I think they sent Sean down to flip the fuse breakers in the
that's it.
cellar, and that's when he checks on the blind. But as part of him switching the fuse breakers on, um, some of the electronics in the pub also switch on,
Including the jukebox, which
including
is
the jukebox.
playing Don't Stop Me Now
Yeah,
by Queen. And everyone, the landlord, the guy, like the pub owner, is now a zombie
yeah,
and coming after them. And everybody grabs a pool cue. And it looks like it's going to be this incredible, like you would expect a trained combat sequence, but these people don't know how to fight.
yeah.
So instead of fighting him like in an impressive way with these cue sticks to this song, they just start whacking him. And it's the first time I saw it, it was one of the funniest things I had ever seen. And one thing leads to another, and he gets pushed around, and they keep whacking him and hitting him. And Di starts throwing darts at him,
Mm,
and one of the darts lands in Sean's skull.
yeah.
And so now he's got a dart in his skull while he's beating this guy with a pool cue. The landlord zombie gets pushed into the jukebox, which then causes it to turn off. And
Yeah.
everyone has to take stock a little bit. The zombies are now piling up outside the windows. Sean has a fucking dart in his head, which he pulls out. They use his red tie to as like a bandage, but it just kind of looks like a Rambo bandana a
Oh yeah,
little
he looks
bit.
so cool at that point.
He does. I think this would be a great cosplay as well, either with the dart in your head or with the red tie around your head,
Mm,
covered in red. Right, you got red on you,
yeah, and a cricket bat.
and a cricket bat, a bloody cricket bat. I mean, so they also discover that the Winchester rifle above the bar is in fact loaded and works. And we have the sequence of Ed now feeding Sean the directions of where and who to shoot that
Yeah,
mirror the video game from the beginning of the film.
yeah. Oh, you've missed out the second gut punch as well.
Is that before? Okay. So before that happens, Liz sits down with mom, who gives her a piece of jewelry. And Liz says, "Oh, I don't think I should take this." And she says, "No, I might not get another chance to give this to another one of Sean's girlfriends." And it turns out that she has been bitten, and it's a bad bite.
Mm,
It's like a hunk of flesh.
yeah,
It's from her wrist where she was hiding early.
yeah,
It's very subtle. They don't zoom in on this, her hiding the bite earlier.
yeah,
It's if you don't know to look for it, you don't know that it's there.
yeah,
But it's a nice
yeah.
detail.
And again, this is kind of this, like I was saying about how, like Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, it's like they went, okay, we want this film to be like 50% rom-com and we want it to be 50% zombie, and they kind of like slowly kind of slice it through. And
Yes.
again, you've got like these big chunks of horror, and then that's almost this mashup and entry back into rom-com that they have, like, the girlfriend meeting the boyfriend's mom for the first time and all that kind of stuff. And this kind of like, okay, so this is still paying homage to both throughout, but just taking like slightly different framing devices and slightly different amounts of like rom-com and zombie tropes. And again, like I mean, I mentioned it in the interview. Like, I genuinely don't think that it will be outdone because of how well it executes everything.
It truly does. The sequence is heart wrenching
Mm.
because Sean is forced to say goodbye to his mom,
Yeah.
and his performance is just like gut wrenching and unexpected because this is not the movie we've been watching up until this point, and this is not the performance we've been watching.
Mm.
It's not a dramatic performance. It's an honest and committed performance, but this level of grief and anger and fear and sadness is just truly remarkable to me.
Mm.
He refuses to do it. He won't do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
He won't shoot his mom,
And this
um,
is like a common zombie trope as well. The kind of like I don't think I can like do this to like someone who I love. Um,
yes.
um, and then yeah, the Dylan Moran character I think is almost like the secondary antagonist to the
Mm-hmm.
film. Like gets their comeuppance.
Yeah, he does because well, go ahead and tell us.
Well, so he's arguing with Sean about doing it, and to be fair, he is. I think like a lot of zombie films do this, where the villain like under a certain viewpoint is correct, like,
Yeah.
and he's saying, "Oh, you need to do it," but actually, if he didn't dislike Sean so much, um, he'd probably come out from like a slightly more sympathetic angle. But because he's been like having loggerheads with Sean throughout the entire film, he comes across as quite impatient and angry, and then it causes this big argument, and then the Dylan Moran character decides that he wants to leave the group, and in him leaving the group, he that's ultimately what causes everyone to finally get into the no, he backs towards the window, and then the zombies like manage to smash through and drag him back, which I want to say is a homage to Day of the Dead, the way that the villain in that gets like all of his guts ripped up, and
They
how
rip
they
open his torso
yeah,
and they pull out his innards, and it looks really good.
yeah,
In the film that it's an homage to, it looks good for the time. It hasn't aged super well. This looks really good. But then it goes overboard and he gets each of his arms ripped off, and his his friends are holding onto his legs, and then they rip his legs off by accident because his torso gets pulled out there, and then his head is ripped off, and it's just fucking
yeah.
ridiculous. And I think, am I wrong? Does somebody start trying to beat the zombies with his leg, or am I making
Yes.
that up?
So the Lucy Davis character then basically like uh, again, this is one of the issues that I have with the film. I don't really understand why she like runs out and goes after
Yeah,
them.
he's just been ripped to pieces.
Yeah,
But it's the trope of he needs me, like
yeah,
hysterica, almost like Barbara in the original Night of the Living Dead.
mm,
Who just kind of loses all touch
yeah.
with reality.
Yeah, and I mean, and again, it's like it's so well done because there's also like there's elements of zombie films in there in the blow up between Sean and the Dylan Moran character, but there's also elements of like rom com in there of that side character that's in love with the main female like love interest, but doesn't but like and that causes like friction between the main character and this side character. And again, it's like amazing how they've managed to cross those genres over like so well in
Yes.
like so many moments throughout the entire film. Like
Yeah.
like to be able to go, oh, and this moment's like a really good mashup of it, and this moment's a really good mashup, and to be able to keep on doing that along with have it transition from a rom com into a zombie film, and to have like all these kind of gut punching moments, and to have all these comedic like a genuine like I don't know what you think, but like for me, Shaun of the Cornetto trilogy, like Shaun of the Dead is like the best one, and the one that's like the most famous. but I think that part of that is because it's so good and so well executed that nothing that follows it, either in this genre or otherwise, can possibly compare because of how well they managed to do the first film.
Yeah, it's hard to capture lightning in a bottle twice, you
Mm.
know. And Hot Fuzz and The World's End are both excellent, incredible films.
Yeah,
Shaun of the Dead was just after this, you know, it's hard to and they're also very different films, and so you have to keep that in mind as well. But Shaun of the Dead just touched something that the other movies it didn't, I guess, you know. But that's not like a shortcoming. That's not
yeah,
necessarily bad. They are all different films.
yeah, totally. Like one's a comedy mashup with an action buddy cop movie, which has
Yes.
kind of been done before, but they trans they take it across the ocean. And at World's End is essentially the same thing, but with a horror sci-fi. And I sometimes wonder if they'd gone for like horror with all three, actually it'd be like it's not as if it's um, not considered like a brilliant trilogy, but I wonder if they had been more consistent with the tone of the three films, if it would be more considered in the same way that like Dawn of the Dead, George A. Romero's like trilogy is, if they'd have
Yeah.
just stuck with so like I mean you could argue that World's End and Shaun of the Dead are both horror films, and if they'd had like a third horror film in there, I think it'd, at least with horror fans, be potentially considered like another kind of classic horror trilogy, even though this
Right.
one's a comedic one.
Yeah. I wonder that too. This I was going to save this, but this movie almost spawned a sequel. They thought about it called Shaun of the Dead 2 From Dusk Till Shaun, and it would have been about battling vampires. And I cannot be more grateful that they didn't move forward with that.
Yeah.
I just feel like this movie's a complete, you know, a complete work.
Oh yeah.
But okay, all right, go ahead.
I was going to say no, totally. I think the fact that they're all their own individual works for them, and like I say, like the Cornetto trilogy is brilliant. Like, and I love Hot Fuzz. I think Hot Fuzz is brilliant. I've probably seen Hot Fuzz more than I've seen Shaun of the Dead, and I've seen Shaun of the Dead loads. Um, I think it's just a case of because they take such a kind of left turn with the second
Yeah,
one, but then like they've done so much and so well with Shaun of the Dead. What could they possibly do other than like take a complete left turn with it anyway?
yeah, yeah. All right. So Di has run out the door to try to save David, which it's too late. They actually made a comic book where she survives and she climbs up a tree
Oh
and she
really?
actually eats David's leg to survive. Um, so that's technically canon,
Oh
but
I
we don't
never.
see any. Yeah, we don't see any of that in the movie. It's assumed that she dies. So Pete, the flatmate, arrives at the bar and busts in
Yeah,
and ends up biting Ed.
yeah,
And it's pretty. Ed is just kind of held down, and he gets bitten on the neck, and then bitten on the arm, and he's bitten all over. And Sean freaks out about it. You
yeah,
know, as he grabs Ed and Liz, and they take cover behind the bar, which is now on fire with Molotov cocktails. So
yeah.
the bar itself is on fire.
Oh
We
yeah, cool,
have
cool sequence.
zombies reaching over the bar. And can I tell you, Tom, I'm not exaggerating. When I'm bartending on a Friday or Saturday night at like 2 or 3 in the morning, this is what it feels like. Just fucking flesh eating maniacal zombies reaching over the bar trying to grab me. So that, I mean, these people they're coked out of their minds and
Mm,
they're hammered and they're just like trying to get my attention, so I serve them next, and it's terrifying. And
yeah,
sometimes I wish that I could just set the bar on fire to get them to take a step back from
yeah.
me.
Well, do you know what? I've only ever worked one shift in a bar, right? And I've always had that feeling of like I imagine if I'd kept on doing like bar work,
Yeah.
like that it would be what it feels like. You know, the idea of them all like reaching in. So it's good to have that thought confirmed from someone who knows that life far better than I.
It's very real, and I have to assume someone who set up this shot has been a bartender. in their life and experience this. They find the hatch behind the bar that leads down to the cellar, and the three of them get down there and escape. And
Yeah.
the
And
movie
again,
gets
I don't know for certain, but I'm guessing that that might be also another reference to Night of the Living Dead, where there's that whole should we stay upstairs or should we go into the
oh,
cellar?
totally, totally, absolutely. Cellar's kind of like the last resort,
Yeah,
right? The last option, the final, because then you're trapped down there.
yeah,
They get down there. Ed's not doing well at all. And they realize they have 2 shots left. And Shaun and Vicky sit next to each other and they, through dialogue, begin to um, sort it out and kind of maybe, Shaun has really stepped up over the last several
mm,
hours. And, it's clear that they still really care about each other. And they contemplate suicide. And,
mm,
it's like, who goes first? And, Liz says, well, I can't shoot you. And then I myself, I'm sure I'd screw it up. And he says, well, I had to kill my stepdad and my mom and my, best friend. I can't kill my girlfriend in the same day. And, and Ed says, I'm okay to be eaten alive. Just don't, don't worry about me. He's got a cigarette in his mouth. It's Shaun and Liz decide they're going to each have a cigarette because they talked about quitting. And, it's interesting because then they end up not doing it, right? There's still kind of hope. It's not like they're completely giving up, because Shaun realizes that the keg lift opens out into the street. And so Ed volunteers. He says, I'm going to stick behind with the
yeah,
rifle. I will fend off the zombies as they
yeah,
come in. You guys take the keg lift up to the street and try to get away that way.
yeah.
So they do, and have to say goodbye to Ed. And he's got this hero moment where he's got the shotgun and cocks it, and they, go up the lift and they say their goodbyes.
Yeah.
So they get to the top of the street, and the fucking zombies are everywhere, and all hope seems to be lost.
Yeah.
Oh, who's the lead singer of Coldplay?
Chris Martin.
Chris Martin is one of the zombies in the scene in this shot, actually, which is funny because he has like a 2-second cameo a little bit later.
Yeah, like I say, I'm pretty sure from my chats with the manager of Comedy Sports UK that like that again was one of the scenes that it was like, because they were doing it on like a lot of the goodwill of the people who wanted to be like the zombie extras. That was like one of the days where they were like, okay, everybody who's been a zombie throughout the recording of this, if you could try and be back for this sequence in order so they had as many as possible.
Yeah, totally. Well, they have several. And Shaun has his bat, and Liz has like a chain, like a big chain kind of wrapped around her hand. And you think they're just going to have to fend off. And then up pulls the army, the military. And they've got machine guns, and they just spray these zombies with bullets. And it happens real fast where they just mow them all down. And Shaun and Liz, survive.
Yeah.
And then Yvonne, the friend, comes to their rescue and is like, I figured you guys could need some help. And, before when she said, is it the two of you? She was referring to Liz and Shaun as a couple. And this time she says, is it just the two of you? And it's like, are you the only two survivors? You know, how are you doing? Surviving.
Yeah.
And it's, but so they survive. And it's great to see Yvonne. She saves the day. And let's see, that's the end of the sequence, right? Yeah. And so they gun down the horde and then take Shaun and Liz to safety.
Yeah, and then again they have like the end. Again, like it's kind of like mirrored that they at the beginning it was this zombie apocalypse that is kind of developing, and then it goes into like rom-com, and they almost kind of like invert it at the end. That it's like, okay, so we've now had this zombie apocalypse, and then they finish on the kind of rom-com elements with the kind of echoes of what had happened, with like repeats of some of the editing sequences that we saw at the beginning of the film. Like I'm pretty sure that Shaun gets up in the same way
Yes, he
But,
does. Yeah.
yeah,
So the kind of shuffling feet.
yeah,
It's 6 months later, basically, and the shuffling feet, and then the pan up the body, and the yawn that sounds like a zombie moan. But now he and Liz live together. She's moved in, and the place looks nicer,
mm,
right? It's kind of got her. He's cleaning up. You can see some of the things that were in her apartment are now in his home. Like
yeah,
they've moved in, and they're watching TV, and it's a montage of like channel changes where showing how the world has overcome. And it's maybe like almost like a Dateline episode of this little boy had to like shoot his entire family in the head on his 8th birthday, or like an obstacle course like that Ninja Challenge show, but it's zombies putting through these obstacles. Or the, like I mentioned, the talk show with the couple who the woman says, I'm still in love with him, and it shows her husband is now a zombie. And
yeah. And again, like there's the thing that I think it does so well is that, like, again, this kind of like horror and comedy of like, oh, that could happen in the real world. Like,
it
for a fact that if,
would happen.
yeah, like they were totally, if they could, if they had zombies and they could like neutralize them, they would, people high up in companies would go, okay, how can we utilize that as free labor?
Yes. Well, there's a brief moment, like a 2-second clip of Chris Martin from Coldplay talking about Zombade, which
Yeah,
is going to be a concert to help raise money for the zombie relief effort. And they turn off the TV. Cute dialogue between Liz and Sean, and then Sean says, "You know what? I'm just going to pop out to the garden for a minute." And Liz says, "Okay, knock yourself out. Go ahead." And he goes into the shed and opens it up and sits down and picks up a video game controller. And we pan over, and zombie Ed is sitting in the shed. He's got shackles around his neck, and he's playing video games. And Sean still gets to hang out with Ed,
yeah,
who is now just, rather than a living zombie, he's just a dead zombie. But he still gets to keep his friend.
yeah, and he's again that kind of Dawn of the Dead, just echoing what he was doing in his life because he's just still playing video games like what he was doing
Yeah.
before.
Yeah, but now there's this balance where Liz is not trying. Sean still gets his friend, and he gets Liz,
Yeah,
and and that's Shaun of the Dead. That's the end of the
yeah,
movie. Holy shit, what a movie! I just love it. I do. I mean, all right, you know what? Let's just not even. Let's cut to the chase. Rick or Treat Horrorcast. There is a rating system. A movie is either a trick, which means it's okay, or it's a treat, which means you love it, or it's a smell my feet, which means you think it sucks.
uh,
Tom.
I'd have to go for a smell my no, no, no. It's like a treat for like, it's like if you are at all into horror, if you are at all into like comedy, like this is like the movie. This is the like this like it is the top of the mountain, and I don't think that there will be any film that knocks it off
No,
anytime soon, if ever.
no, it kind of came out of nowhere. It was made when it was made. Uh, they didn't realize that the Dawn of the Dead remake was about to come out, and then 28 days later was also in development. And so they went from being super excited about being the first zombie movie in many, many years to then, oh my God, are we oversaturating the market? But I actually think that those films, all of these coming out at the same time, was actually really helpful,
Mm.
right? Now we have zombies. We went through the whole Walking Dead, too many zombies phase, But I think that this was the perfect timing. Edgar Wright was in touch with with Nolan about the Dawn of the Dead remake to make sure that they were not making the same jokes, or
I
that
never
there
knew
were
that.
too many overlaps. In fact, there was one joke that Edgar agreed to cut from the script because Nolan's version had it, and then it ended up not being in Nolan's version at all. So one joke was the sacrifice that was made in order to maintain,
Yeah,
the film's not crossing over too much. But it's a class. It was an instant classic. I think it was a classic from the moment it was first released. Everyone knew.
yeah. Like I say, I don't think it is a surprise. As much like I said it at the beginning, like it launched, Simon Pegg, and it launched Edgar Wright. Like it's like it is that good that it put them on the map. And
Yeah.
as much as it's got links to Space, like Space did not launch them. like this is the thing that, I'm not saying he did Shaun of the Dead and then he was in Mission Impossible, but it's very unlikely that without Shaun of the Dead, he is not in Mission Impossible. It's very
And
unlikely.
Star Trek, and yeah,
Yeah, it's very unlikely that without Shaun of the Dead, like that Edgar Wright is getting Scott Pilgrim.
sure,
Like
yeah,
that, it's so seminal to like both of those like incredibly successful like creative people.
yeah.
It's so good.
It genuinely is, and I'm always happy to watch it. Always happy to watch it. Don't get sick of this one at all.
Yeah, and again, I think part of that is because it's so detailed that like every
Yeah.
time you watch it, there'll be something that you're like, oh, do you know I've watched this 100 times and I never noticed that like one little thing, and then it's as if you've watched the entire movie for the first time again.
Yep. Repeat viewing is rewarded every single time.
Mm.
Well, Tom, thank you so much for taking the time to appear on the show. Will you please remind listeners, first off, let them know where they can stalk you
Uh,
on social media, and then remind them where they can go see the stand-up horror show.
so I do everything under a banner online called Hot Storm Productions, which is a an anagram of my name. So if you come to Hot Storm Productions, what I'm going to do with this when this goes out, I wrote a little piece about because I also, in addition to all the comedy stuff that I do, I also I'm an associate lecturer at the University of Salford and teach people how to do like comedy theory, which was one of the reasons why I was like so excited to do this podcast. Like being so into like horror and so into comedy and being able to kind of mash that up on this podcast and talk about two things that I'm really passionate about. But what I thought would be interesting is as a companion piece to this podcast when it goes out, I'm going to put on on my comedy page that I run called Comedy Lab, a piece about how Shaun of the Dead works, like in the mechanics of comedy and like some of the horror tropes that it does and how it mashes up. So if that sounds like something that you'd be interested in, I'm going to put that out as like an additional little like thing that you can have a read of if that sounds like your bag. So that's on Comedy Lab and Hot Storm Productions. And the stand-up horror show is on this year in Edinburgh from the 3rd to the 27th of August at 3:40 p.m. at just the spare room at the Caves, which is like a gothic theatre venue up in Edinburgh.
Incredible. Absolutely incredible. You should read this piece that Tom has written because it's very thorough. B, you should read my interview with Tom at ruemorgue.com. By the time this episode comes out, I believe it will have already been released. And so it goes into a lot greater detail for the stand-up horror show and from conception until now. And if you want to know more about the podcast, visit rickretreat.com with links to all of my writing and a little bio and links to my social media, Rick Retreat Pod on Instagram. And Tom, again, I can't thank you enough. You're welcome back anytime.
You're going to regret saying that. I would love to come back.
You will be, I promise you. Hey, all right, listeners, thank you for listening, and we will see y'all later, spookies.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming Rick or Treating. You can follow the show on Instagram at Rick or Treat Pod. It'd be a real scream if you'd take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review the show on whatever platform you're listening on. The show's spooky intro and outro music is a cover of Camille Saint-Saëns' Danse Macabre, with orchestrations composed and performed by Lestat von Monlicht. Links to the artist's music can be found in the episode description. Check him out, he's frighteningly talented. Rick or Treat Horrorcast is independently produced by me, Ricky J. Duarte of Rick or Treat Productions. If you like what you heard, tell a friend. If you didn't, well, they're coming to get you, listener.